Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode 2 of DCS A-18C Hornet familiarization videos. Since episode 1, we've been slugging away on the Hornet, with particular focus on the cockpit and the systems to allow cold start procedure. For this video though, we'll take a look at the cockpit panels and basic functionality. In the next video, episode 3, we'll review the pre-flight checklist and the startup procedures. For this video and later videos, as well as the documentation we'll supply, the cockpit can be divided into 10 general locations. The left console on wall, the throttles, left vertical panel, the left instrument panel, the head-up display or HUD, the center instrument panel, the right instrument panel, the right vertical panel, the control stick, and the right console and wall. Now let's move around the cockpit from left to right and take a look at each area in a little more detail. We'll start with the left console and wall. So starting at the back, we have the switch for the mission computers, Mission Computer 1 and Mission Computer 2. Generally this will be turned to normal, but in the case of a mission computer failure, you could disable either 1 or 2 to reset it. Next to this is the hydraulic isolation switch, and this is usually set to the normal position, but it can be set to override the hydraulic accumulation for the APU. Now, right below those two switches is the OBOX panel, or the onboard oxygen generation system, and this includes both a flow knob as well as an on-off switch. Against the wall, we have the antenna select panel for the COM1 radio to use either the upper or lower antennas or the auto, and next to it we have the IFF to again use either the upper, lower, or both. And for the most part, these will generally be set to auto in both. So below the antenna select control head, you have the IFF panel. But in the center of that is your manual channel for ILS selection, and this includes a dial between 1 and 20 for different ILS channels. And the switch on the right side of the panel allows you to set the ILS channel through the USC when it's in up position, or set it manually through the knob when it's in the manual down position. Now to the right is the volume panel, and this controls the levels of what you hear through the headset, like the MIDS radios, weapon audio, and comms. Now just forward to that is the FCS panel, and this includes a rudder trim knob on the left side that allows you to manually set rudder trim, and in the center it has the takeoff trim button. Next to that is the gain switch, and usually this is set to the normal position, but you can set it to the override position to set your flaps to discrete values when below 200 knots. And right next to that is the FCS reset button, which we'll take a look at when we do the cold start in the next episode. Now just outboard of the FCS panel is the switch for the auxiliary power unit, or APU. And this is a small gas turbine that in turn powers the air turbine starters, or ATS, which then start the engines. And right next to it is the APU light, which will turn green once it's all spun up and ready to start the engine. And just after the APU switch is the engine crank switch, which can be either thrown left or right to start the respective engine. But we'll take a much closer look at that in the next video. So moving forward on the left console, we have the fuel panel, and on the left side we have the switch that controls the extension and retraction of the aerial refueling probe. And next to that we have two switches that control the fuel flow from external fuel tanks. One switch for the two wing tanks, and then one switch for the center tank. And again, normally these would be set to the normal position. And on the right side of the panel, you have your fuel dump switch, which can be quite important when you're bringing the aircraft back to the carrier and you have to make sure that you're within your maximum trap weight. And next we have the throttles, and the throttles are one half of the HOTAS system, and they provide hands-on control for functions such as the communications, the countermeasures, the speed brake, antenna elevation, and others. It's a split linear movement throttle, and it controls the thrust of both engines, but they're generally moved as a single unit, except during startup and shutdown. And the throttles do have automatic throttle control, or ATC, for both cruise and approach modes. So outboard of the throttle, we have the internal wing fuel switch, which is either inhibit or norm, and this controls the flow of fuel from the wing tanks. And generally this will be set to the norm position. And above that, we have the exterior light controls, and this includes a strobe switch for 2 red strobe lights, the position lights, and the formation lights, or the slime lights. And outboard of the external light panel is the generator tie switch, and this allows the pilot to override the AC bus isolation circuit, but in all likelihood you'll probably never have to touch the switch. Now here at the top of the left console you have the external power panel, and this includes the external power switch. So if you have an external power source, you can enable the switch and have it energize the aircraft buses instead of using the battery. Now also on this panel you have the 4 ground power switches. These 4 ground power switches each control a different group of systems and instruments. For a ground power star, these are all usually set to the auto position. And the last switch on the left console is the fire test switch, and this will test both circuits for detecting fires in the engines, the bleed air systems, or the APU. So along the left wall of the aircraft you have 4 circuit breakers, one for flight control system channel 1, one for channel 2, one for the speed brake, and then one for the launch bar. And then forward of that you have a big red dispenser button to manually dispense countermeasures. So let's move on now to the left vertical panel and start with the hook bypass switch. And this basically affects the angle of attack indexer lights on the left side of the head-up display based on the hook being down or up and whether you're going to land on an airfield or the carrier. And we'll take a look at that in later videos when we get to landings. And to the right of that is our hydraulic brake accumulation gauge, and right next to that is the emergency / parking brake. You pull it directly out for the emergency, and you pull it out and twist it for the parking brake. Now above that is the selective jettison switch, and this can be rotated to determine how you wish to jettison the selected ordnance, be it stores or racks, and the center button in the middle will then actually jettison the selected store. And next to that we have the flap switch, which has positions for either auto, half, or full flaps. The anti-skid switch has a lock wheel protection circuit which will release the brake if the speed of one wheel is 40% of the other wheel. The landing and taxi light switch controls a combination landing taxi light that's located on the nose gear strut. And the launch bar switch controls the hydraulically operated launch bar that's used for catapult launches. And here at the top of the left vertical panel you have the landing gear handle, which controls the tricycle landing gear and is based on weight on wheels and the launch bar condition. And right next to it is the down lock override button, and by pressing and holding this button it retracts the mechanical stops from the landing gear handle, and this allows it to move down to up in case of a failure. And the last element of the left vertical panel is the canopy jettison handle, which is the big black and yellow striped handle here. So let's move on now to the left instrument panel, and we'll start with the large black and yellow button here, which is your emergency jettison switch. And right above that is your master arm switch, either arm or safe. And then above that are your 2 master mode switches, one for air to air and one for air to ground. And then right above that are your 2 indicator lights for your fire engine extinguishers. And to the right of that is your multi-purpose display indicator, or your MDI, and these replace the older DDIs from earlier lot Hornets. Now here above your left MDI is your left engine fire indicator, your master caution light, as well as your left instrument advisory lights. And here below the left MDI you have your selectors for selective jettison for center and the left and right wing stations, and below those you have your indicator lights for your landing gear and flap positions. And to the right of that you have your IFE, or your integrated fuel and engine indicator, and this includes important information about your engine performance, your fuel loads, as well as a time tool. And we'll certainly talk about the IFE in a lot more detail in a later video. In the top center of the instrument panel, we have the head-up display, or the HUD, and this will display important flight, weapon, and sensor information. But we'll be taking a much closer look at that later on. But on the left side of the HUD is your angle of attack indexer, and this will be 3 lights, which will instruct you to be maintaining an 8.1 degree angle of attack, which will be your optimal angle of attack for landings. Now below the HUD is the upfront controller, or the UFC, and this will be a very important tool in selecting modes, inputting data, and several other functions. Now on the UFC you have many important functions that include the data entry keypad, the option to select buttons, the option to select windows, the ability to select radio channels for COM 1 and COM 2, and then below that you have buttons for selecting different autopilot modes, IFF, TACAN mode, selecting ILS, data link, beacons, and an on-off switch to turn options on and off. Now below the UFC you have your HUD control panel, and this includes a reject switch to show or not show certain information on the heads-up display. You have your brightness knob for the HUD, and also you have a brightness knob for the angle of attack indexer lights. You also have a day-night master mode brightness for the HUD, and you also have a selector switch to show either barometric or radar altitude on the HUD. And in addition to determining the attitude source information, you also have some controls that you can adjust video displayed on the HUD. Now moving down on the center instrument panel, we have the Advanced Multipurpose Color Display, or the AMPCD. And like the MDIs, you can display many different types of information on this display, but primarily it's used to display the moving map with the HSI overlay. And at the very bottom of the center instrument panel, you have your defensive system controls. And this includes your selector for your countermeasure dispensing, whether you're going to use single or a program release, your ECM settings, your number of shaft and flare remaining, and also you have your cabin pressure indicator as well. Ahead of the center instrument panel is the control stick. In addition to traditional pitch and roll control, the control stick also provides numerous HOTAS functions to include trim, weapon selection, weapon release and firing, control selection, just to name a few. Moving to our right instrument panel, we have our right instrument panel advisory lights, the APU fire light, and the right engine fire light. And just below that we have our right MDI, which operates just the same as the left side. And to the right of the right MDI, we have our IR cool switch for our AIM-9 Sidewinder. And below that, we have our power switch and brightness switch for our helmet-mounted display, our J-HICMAS. And below the HMD control is the spin recovery switch, which would only be used if you were to enter a spin and the flight control system was already offline. Only at that point would you use this. For the most part, if you get into a spin, it's essentially hands off the controls and the aircraft will recover automatically for you. As a little side note, in talking to our Hornet pilots that we're working with, none of them have actually ever used the spin recovery switch or the GENTI switch. Now to the right of that, along the canopy frame, is a standard magnetic compass. And at the bottom of the right instrument panel, below the right MDI, you have a cluster of 5 instruments. You have your standby attitude indicator, your azimuth indicator or your radar warning receiver, your airspeed indicator, your barometric altimeter, and your vertical velocity indicator. So now we'll go ahead and move to the right vertical panel, and at the very top we have the arrestor hook handle with the light above it when the hook is down. And below that we have our radar altimeter, which indicates the aircraft clearance over land and water from 0 to 5,000 feet. Below that is a hydraulic pressure indicator for both systems, and to the right of that is our right vertical panel advisory lights. The avionics cool switch will cool flight computer A in the right transformer rectifier with ram air. Normally, these and the other FCC and transformer rectifiers are cooled with avionics air. The final element of the right vertical panel is the wing fold handle, and by pulling out and rotating this handle, the outer wing panels are folded vertically. Let's move down now to the right console and wall. At the top of the right console is the electrical panel. The battery switch enables or disables the two batteries, utility and emergency. It's used when external power is not available, but it also provides power to essential functions like the canopy. The voltage meter for the batteries is located in the top left corner of the panel. On either side of the battery switch are the left and right generator switches, but these are generally kept in the on position. Alongside the right console is the arming handle for the NACIS ejection seat. Below the electrical panel is the ECS panel, or Environmental Control Systems. This consists of a mode switch that controls the general airflow into the cabin, but generally this is always set into the auto position. Next to it is your temperature control dial and a cabin pressure dump switch. The pitot switch can set to on or auto, and when in auto mode it will automatically come on once the aircraft is airborne. Next to that you have your anti-ice engine control, and next to that you have your bleed air control that siphons air from the engines. Below the ECS panel we have the internal lights panel. On this panel we have lighting control for the left and right consoles, the instrument panel, a general floodlight, the warning and caution lights, and the chart, which is basically the knee board. We also have a test switch for all warning, caution, advisory, and instrument lights, as well as a switch for either day, night, or NVG mode. To the right in the internal lighting panel is the lever for defogging, and below that is a switch for anti-icing and rain on the windshield. Further back on the console we have the sensor panel. This consists of the forward-looking infrared switch, or the FLIR, the laser target designating and ranging switch, and the laser spot tracking navigation FLIR switch. Also in this panel we have the radar control knob and the inertial navigation system knob. Furthest back on the right console is the KY58 encryption system. Along the right wall we have the canopy control switch. A little further back we have circuit breakers for the flight control system channel 3 and 4, as well as for the hook and the landing gear. Lastly, we have a switch for the flight control system built-in test. I'll turn on the battery now and close the canopy so we can take a look at just a few more things. Behind our left and right shoulders are airborne video tape recorders, or AVTRs, that record the left and right MDI displays. Over our left shoulder is the magnetic sensor for the joint helmet-mounted cueing system. On the forward bow of the canopy, we have lights for both lock and shoot. This concludes this tour of the cockpit of our F-A-18C. I'll see you next time when we go over the pre-flight and startup procedure for our Hornet. Thanks.